All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're tackling a really hot topic.
Yeah.
Something that's been in the news a lot. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. We're talking about the recent measles outbreak
hmm
and all the discussions going on around immunity and vaccines.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
There really is.
Mm.
So to help us break it all down, we've got some great sources lined up. We've got articles by Lakey Emmons and Keneal Patterson.
Okay.
Um, we've put together a timeline of all the kind of the key events.
Right.
And of course, we got to talk about the big names involved.
Mm.
You've probably seen the headlines, right? Measles is back.
It's
I
back.
think RFK Jr. is, well, he's definitely making waves with his opinions on vaccines.
He's not shying away from the spotlight, that's for sure.
Definitely not. So that's what we're diving into today. What's the real story here? What's going on?
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation, I think, because it really brings up so many different angles, right? You've
Yeah.
got scientific evidence, individual choices,
Right.
public health concerns, and then even the political
It's
angle.
all tangled up together, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay, so let's start with just the basics. The measles outbreak itself. What are we looking at here? Over 220 cases in Texas, and then more popping up in places like California,
Hmm.
New York, Maryland.
Right, it seems to be spreading.
Yeah, and the CDC is, I mean, they're definitely concerned. They've said as much, especially because, vaccination rates in Texas, they're lower than in some other states.
Right, that's a big part of the issue here.
It is, and it's kind of what makes this whole situation so interesting.
Yeah.
Is that, it's 2025. We have this very effective vaccine
Exactly.
for
They're
measles.
very effective.
So why are we seeing these outbreaks now?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It is. And that leads us to RFK Jr. He's the Health and Human Services Secretary, of course, under President Trump.
Right.
And he's pretty well known for his stance on vaccines.
His views have definitely been in the spotlight.
Yeah, and they've been pretty controversial, I'd say.
For sure.
Um, and he recently did an interview on Fox News with Sean Hannity.
Okay.
And that really kind of stirred things up, right?
Yeah, that interview definitely got people talking.
It did. His position has definitely sparked a lot of debate, especially given, his role in the government.
Right, being the Health and Human Services Secretary, it definitely carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, it does. So let's dive into some of the specific things he said. In that interview, he made some comments about measles and the MMR vaccine
Okay.
that really got people talking. Like, he actually said it would be better if everybody got measles, because it gives you lifetime protection.
That was a pretty bold statement.
It was. And then he also said that the MMR vaccine's effectiveness kind of wanes over time.
Yeah, so you got these two contrasting ideas, right?
Yeah.
Natural immunity versus vaccine-induced immunity.
Right. And he seems to be leaning towards the natural immunity side of things.
He definitely seems to favor that approach.
He does. So I think maybe for our listener, it might be helpful to kind of unpack this whole natural versus vaccine-induced immunity thing.
Yeah, that's a great place to start.
What's the difference there?
Okay, so think of it this way. When you actually get sick with measles, your body, right, it has to fight it off. And when it does that, it builds up this, defense system specifically against measles.
Okay.
And that's natural immunity. Your body's learned how to fight it off.
Right. So you build up those antibodies.
Exactly. You build up those antibodies. But the problem is that getting the actual disease, like getting sick with measles, can be really dangerous.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, even deadly in some cases.
So it's risky.
It's very risky, especially for certain groups of people.
That makes sense. So then where does the vaccine fit into all of this?
Right. So vaccines work by kind of tricking your body a little bit. They introduce a weakened or inactive version of the virus, and that basically triggers your immune system to create those antibodies.
So it's like a training exercise for your immune system.
Exactly. You get the protection without actually having to go through the full-blown illness.
So you get all the benefits without the risk.
Exactly. That's the idea.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But what about RFK Jr.'s claim that the MMR vaccine's effectiveness kind of wears off over time?
Yeah, so it's true that no vaccine is 100% effective forever, right?
Right.
Nothing is perfect. But the MMR vaccine is incredibly effective. Like, we're talking data from the CDC shows that one dose gives you 93% protection against measles.
Wow, that's pretty high.
It is. And then 2 doses, that bumps it up to 97%.
So basically, you're pretty much covered.
You're very well
Yeah.
protected. So yeah, while it might wane a tiny bit over time, it's still offering really strong protection.
And it's a lot less risky than actually getting measles.
Exactly. You're avoiding that potential for serious complication.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think another thing we have to talk about is this whole idea of herd immunity.
Yes, herd immunity is crucial.
Can you explain that one for our listener?
Absolutely. So when a large enough portion of the population is vaccinated, it actually makes it much harder for a disease to spread.
Even among those who aren't vaccinated.
Among those who aren't vaccinated, exactly. It's like the virus hits a wall and can't really go any further. And that's super important for protecting those who are vulnerable, right? Like infants who can't get vaccinated yet, or people with compromised immune systems.
Yeah, the people who can't get vaccinated for whatever reason.
Exactly. So herd immunity helps protect everyone.
It's like a community effort, kind of.
It really is, yeah.
So RFK Jr., he also talked about maternal immunity in that interview.
Right. That was another interesting point he brought up.
Yeah, he was kind of suggesting that women who are vaccinated don't pass on the same level of protection to their babies.
As those who had measles naturally.
Yeah, what's the science behind that?
So that's actually a pretty common misconception. A mother who had measles naturally, she does pass on antibodies to her baby, it's true. But that protection, it's temporary.
Okay.
It only lasts for like 6 months.
Oh, so it's not a lifetime thing?
Not at all. On the other hand, vaccinating women during pregnancy, that actually helps protect their babies from diseases like whooping cough and influenza.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there are benefits to vaccination even during pregnancy. And the CDC, they recommend that all infants actually receive the MMR vaccine starting at 12 months of age
Okay.
to make sure they have that ongoing protection.
So it seems like there's a lot of nuance to this topic that maybe isn't always reflected in, like, these public discussions.
Right, exactly. It's complicated.
It is.
There's a lot of information out there, and it can be hard to separate fact from fiction sometimes.
It really can, and I think that's a big part of the challenge here. RFK Jr., he also brought up some concerns about, the safety of the MMR vaccine.
That's a common concern.
Yeah, he suggested that there might be a link to some adverse effects like encephalitis and blindness.
Okay.
He even said that, it leads to deaths every year.
So obviously those are really serious claims.
They are. And it's understandable that people would be concerned about vaccine safety, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's a big decision, especially when it comes to, your children's health.
Of course.
But I think it's really important to rely on, credible sources of information.
Yes, absolutely. Stick to the science.
Now, the CDC, they've done a lot of research on this, and they say that serious side effects from the MMR vaccine are incredibly rare.
Yeah, incredibly rare.
Like, the benefits of vaccination far outweigh any potential risks.
Right. It's about weighing the risks and benefits.
It is. So I think it's important to, acknowledge that people have these concerns about vaccine safety, but the data really does seem to back up the effectiveness and overall safety of the MMR vaccine.
Yeah, the science is pretty clear on that.
Yeah, it is. And, something else that I found really fascinating about RFK Jr.'s stance is how he frames this whole thing as like a matter of personal choice and freedom.
The freedom to choose whether or not to vaccinate.
Yeah, he's arguing that people should have the right to decide for themselves.
Right. So it becomes this question of individual rights versus public health.
Exactly. And that's where things get really tricky.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, that's for sure.
No easy answers at all. You've got personal beliefs, scientific evidence, public health concerns, all kind of crashing into each other.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm in a way.
It really is.
You've got all these different forces at play.
And it's, it's not just about the science either, right? There's a lot of emotion tied up in this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's about people's values, their beliefs about their bodies.
It's deeply personal for a lot of people.
It is. So how do we navigate this?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. How do we find that balance between individual freedom and, what's best for the collective good?
It's a tightrope walk for sure.
It is.
Different societies approach it in different ways, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
I guess that's true of most things, isn't it?
Probably. But it's definitely something we need to keep talking about and trying to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. And to add another layer to all of this, RFK Jr.'s top spokesperson, Thomas Corey, he actually resigned.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just 2 weeks into his job.
2 weeks. That's pretty telling.
It is. And apparently it was because of disagreements about how RFK Jr. was handling this whole measles outbreak.
So there's some internal conflict there, even within the Health and Human Services Department.
Yeah, it definitely raises some questions about, what's going on behind the scenes.
It does. What are the different viewpoints within the administration?
It makes you wonder if maybe some people are pushing back against RFK Jr.'s, his more controversial statements.
It's possible you've got those political pressures coming into play as well.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider.
It is. It highlights those challenges of navigating this issue, even within the government.
Right, because they're dealing with all the same things we are, right? The science, the individual beliefs, the public health concerns.
And the political pressures.
And the political pressures, exactly.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. It's a lot to juggle. And the stakes are high.
They are. We're talking about people's health, their children's well-being?
Yeah, it's not something to be taken lightly.
Definitely not.
So, given all of this, what do we do?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
How do we bridge this gap between, those who are hesitant about vaccines and the overwhelming scientific consensus that they're safe and effective?
Right, because that gap is there.
It's definitely there, and it's a challenge.
So how do we even start to address that?
Well, I think a big part of it comes down to communication.
Okay.
We need to make sure that people have access to accurate information about vaccines.
So we're fighting that misinformation.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it needs to be presented in a way that's easy to understand, that's relatable.
Like ditching all the jargon and the complicated scientific terms.
Exactly. It's about meeting people where they are,
Right, and not just, throwing facts and figures at them.
No, it's not just about that.
It's about understanding their concerns.
Absolutely. It's about addressing their fears with empathy and understanding.
So more listening and less lecturing.
I think that's a great way to put it. People need to feel heard and respected, even if their views are different from the mainstream.
Yeah, because there are reasons why people are hesitant, right?
Right, there are. It's not always just about, being anti-science or something like that. Maybe they've had a negative experience with healthcare in the past.
Right.
Or maybe they've been exposed to misinformation online.
There's a lot of that going around.
There really is. So it's about understanding those perspectives.
So it's almost like before you can even start talking about the science,
Yeah.
you need to build that foundation of trust.
You hit the nail on the head. Trust is key. And that takes time. It takes effort. And it's not just the responsibility of, doctors and scientists either.
Right.
We all have a role to play in this, right?
Yeah.
In promoting accurate information and having these respectful conversations.
So it's like a community effort, kind of like herd immunity.
Exactly. It takes a village.
It does. So it sounds like we need like a multi-pronged approach here, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it.
Education, empathy, open communication, and that focus on building trust.
Absolutely. It's not a quick fix, but it's essential if we want to move forward in a way that protects both individual rights and public health.
Right. Finding that balance.
That's the goal.
Yeah. And do you think that, this whole situation with RFK Jr., could this be like a turning point in the conversation?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, on the one hand, his comments, they've generated so much controversy, right? And
Right.
they've pushed this whole debate further into the public eye.
Right.
So in a way, it's forcing us to confront these tough questions.
It is.
About immunity, about vaccines, about the role of government.
So maybe it's less about, right or wrong and more about acknowledging that this is a complex issue.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that there are different perspectives and weighing the evidence carefully and finding a way forward that respects, both individual choices and the well-being of the community.
Right, because those things are both important.
They are. It's a delicate balance, that's for sure.
It is. But hopefully, if we can have these conversations in a thoughtful way,
Right.
in a respectful way, then maybe we can find a way to, move forward together.
I hope so. I'm hopeful that we can. I mean, we've come a long way in terms of understanding and combating infectious diseases, right?
We have.
And I believe we can continue to make progress if we approach these challenges with, open minds and a commitment to finding common ground.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I
Yeah.
want to make sure our listener knows that, this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
There's so much more to explore about this whole topic.
absolutely. If you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to check out the articles that we've linked in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely check those out.
There's so much information out there from, historical accounts of vaccine hesitancy to in-depth scientific explanations of how vaccines work.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff.
It is. It's
It's
fascinating.
like peeling back the layers of an onion. Right.
It is. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to learn.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting, right?
It really does.
It's not just about science. It's not just about politics. It's not just about personal beliefs. It's about all of these things kind of tangled together.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It is.
It's about the human experience, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it really is.
In a way.
So just to quickly recap what we've covered in this first part, we started with, the measles outbreak itself.
Mm-hmm.
Then we dove into RFK Jr.'s, his controversial statements.
Right. His views on immunity and vaccines.
Exactly. We talked about the difference between natural immunity and vaccine-induced immunity.
Right. And addressing some common misconceptions there.
Yeah, and we touched on that really tricky balance between individual rights and public health.
Which is really at the heart of this whole debate.
It is. And of course, we can't forget about the recent resignation of RFK Jr.'s spokesperson.
Yeah, that adds another layer of complexity to the situation.
It really does. It feels like we're at this, crossroads with so many different perspectives and opinions swirling around.
It's a dynamic situation for sure.
It is. So for you listening out there, here's something to think about. Given everything that we've talked about today, where do you stand on this whole balance between personal choice and public health when it comes to vaccines?
It's a tough question.
It is. It's a tough question, but it's a question worth considering, especially as this conversation continues to unfold.
It's an ongoing conversation, that's for sure.
It is. And remember, this deep dive, this is just a starting point.
Right. There's always more to learn.
Always more to learn. We always encourage you to explore those sources that we mentioned, to dig a little deeper into this, complex and always evolving issue.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. That's right. And when it comes to our health, being informed is absolutely crucial.
Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this first part of our deep dive. We'll be back soon with part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into this fascinating and, very relevant topic.
Looking forward to it.
You too. All right. Until then, stay curious.
Stay curious.
Yeah, it really feels like we're always walking this line between individual freedom and what's best for everyone the collective good.
It is a tough one.
It's a hard conversation to even have.
You're right, yeah. It's like a balancing act, and different places, different countries, different societies, they approach it in different ways.
And to make things even more complicated, we mentioned RFK Jr.'s top spokesperson, Thomas Corey.
Right.
He resigned,
He did.
just 2 weeks into the job.
That's huge.
It's a big deal. And it was apparently because of disagreements over how RFK Jr. was handling this measles outbreak.
So that really suggests some inner turmoil, right? Some conflict within the Health and Human Services Department about how to, address this.
Right, how to address vaccine hesitancy and this outbreak.
Yeah, exactly.
It definitely raises some eyebrows, like what's really going on behind the scenes here.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what those conversations were like.
It does. And, it makes you wonder, were people pushing back against some of his more controversial statements?
It's possible, yeah. I mean, you've got to figure those political pressures are pretty intense.
Oh, for sure. Especially in a situation like this.
Exactly, and especially in that role, Health and Human Services Secretary.
It's a tough job.
It is. So, yeah, it really highlights these challenges that we're talking about, right? It's not just a public debate. This is happening within the government itself.
You've got the science, you've got people's beliefs, public health concerns.
The political pressures.
Colliding.
Yeah, they're all coming together.
So where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what can we actually do?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we bridge this gap? How do we bring people together on this?
Right, because there is a gap right now between people who are hesitant about vaccines and then, this huge body of scientific evidence.
A huge gap.
Showing that they work and that they're safe.
Right. And so how do we even begin to address that?
That's a good question. I don't know. Where do we start?
Well, I think communication is key, right?
Well,
we need to make sure that people have access to good information.
So, fighting misinformation.
Exactly. And we need to make sure that the information that's out there is clear.
Easy to understand.
Easy to understand, yeah.
Maybe ditch all the jargon and stuff.
Get rid of the jargon, yeah. We need to meet people where they are.
Right. And it's not just about, hitting them over the head with facts and figures.
No, it's not a lecture.
It's about understanding their concerns.
Absolutely. It's about acknowledging their fears and, trying to respond to them with empathy.
So less lecturing, more listening.
Exactly. People need to feel heard. They need to feel respected, even if their views are different from, from what the scientists are saying.
Right. And there are reasons why people are hesitant, right?
Mhm.
It's not always just, black and white.
It's complex. Maybe they had a negative experience with healthcare in the past, or maybe they've been, reading stuff online. They've seen some misinformation.
There's a lot of that out there.
There really is.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that.
So it's almost like before you can even start talking about the science, you need to kind of build that foundation of trust.
Trust is essential. Absolutely. And that takes time. It takes effort. It takes patience.
It does.
And, it's not just the responsibility of doctors and scientists either. This is on all of us.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a community effort again.
It really is, yeah. Like we were saying about herd immunity, we all have a role to play in promoting good information and having respectful conversations.
We need like a multi-pronged approach then.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Education, empathy, open communication, and that focus on building trust.
Exactly. And that's how we can protect individual rights and public health, right?
Right. Finding that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think this whole RFK Jr. situation, could it be a turning point? Like, could it actually be a good thing for this conversation?
It's really hard to say. I mean, his comments, they've definitely sparked a lot of controversy.
They have.
But they've also brought this issue to the forefront, right?
Yeah. More people are talking about it.
Exactly. And we're kind of forced to confront these tough questions.
So maybe it's less about, being right or wrong and more about just acknowledging how complex this all is.
I think that's a great way to look at it. There are so many different perspectives, and it's about listening to each other, weighing the evidence, and finding a way forward that works for everyone.
That respects individual choices, but also
Yeah.
protects the whole community.
Exactly.
It's a tough balance.
It is a delicate balance, that's for sure.
But hopefully by engaging in these conversations in a thoughtful way, in a respectful way, we can find a way to move forward together.
I hope so. I mean, we've
Yeah.
come so far in understanding and combating infectious diseases, right?
We have.
And I really do believe we can keep making progress if we approach these challenges with, open minds
Right.
and a commitment to finding common ground.
I like that, finding common ground.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I just want to remind everyone listening that this is really just scratching the surface.
Yeah, we're just getting started.
There is so much more to explore with this topic.
If you're interested in learning more, we've got some great articles linked in the show notes, so check those out.
Yeah, definitely check those out.
There's a ton of information out there. You can find everything from, historical accounts of vaccine hesitancy to really in-depth explanations of how vaccines work.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
It really is. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
It is. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to learn,
Exactly.
which is what makes it so interesting, right?
It really does.
It's not just about science or politics or personal beliefs. It's about all of these things kind of intertwined.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It's about the human experience.
It is, in a way.
So let's do a quick recap of what we covered in this part. We talked about that tension, right, between individual freedom and the public good.
Right, that ongoing balancing act.
And we talked about RFK Jr.'s spokesperson resigning.
Yeah, a big development in this story.
It is. And then we discussed, how do we actually move forward?
How do we bridge that gap?
How do we communicate more effectively? How do we build trust?
Those are the big questions.
They are big questions. And it feels like we're kind of at this crossroads with so many different perspectives and opinions.
Yeah, there's a lot of voices in this conversation.
There are. So for everyone listening, here's something to think about. Given everything we've talked about today, where do you stand on that balance between personal choice and public health when it comes to vaccines?
Yeah, what does that balance look like to you?
It's a tough question, but it's definitely worth considering.
Especially as this conversation continues to evolve.
And this is just a starting point. So
Yeah.
we always encourage you to go out there, do your own research, explore those sources, and, dig a little deeper into this issue.
Because like we said, knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. And when it comes to our health, being informed is so important.
Couldn't agree more.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for the second part of our deep dive. We'll be back soon with the third and final part where we'll wrap everything up and hopefully leave you with some things to ponder.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. All right. Until then, stay curious.
Stay curious. It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion.
It is. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is out there to learn.
And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
It really does.
It's not just about the science. It's not just about politics or personal beliefs. It's about all of these things kind of coming together.
Yeah. It's all connected, isn't it?
It is. It's really about the human experience in a way.
It is. It really is. So let's quickly recap what we've talked about today. We started with the measles outbreak,
Right. That was our starting point.
and then we dove into RFK Jr.'s, some of his more controversial statements about immunity and vaccines.
His perspective on things, yeah.
And then we talked about the difference between natural immunity and vaccine-induced immunity.
Right, trying to clear up some of those misconceptions that are out there.
Exactly. And we also touched on that really tricky balance between individual rights and public health.
Which is really at the core of this whole debate.
It is. And of course, we can't forget about the recent resignation of RFK Jr.'s spokesperson.
Yeah, that was a pretty big development.
It was. It kind of leaves us with more questions than answers, I think.
It does. It definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation.
It really does. It feels like we're at this crossroads with so many different perspectives and opinions swirling around.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic situation, for sure.
It is. So for everyone listening out there, here's something we want you to think about. Given everything we've talked about today, where do you stand on this whole balance between personal choice and public health when it comes to vaccines?
What does that balance look like to you?
That's a tough question.
It is a tough question, but it's one worth thinking about.
It is, especially as this conversation continues to evolve.
Because it's not going away anytime soon.
It's not. And remember, this deep dive, it's just a starting point.
Right. There's always more to learn.
Always more to learn. We always encourage you to go out there, do your own research, explore the sources we mentioned, and really dig a little deeper into this whole issue.
Absolutely. Remember, knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power, that's right. And when it comes to our health, being informed is so, so important.
Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more. All right, well, that wraps up our deep dive on the measles outbreak and the discussions around immunity and vaccines. It's been a really fascinating conversation.
It has a lot to think about.
It really is. And we hope you found it informative and thought-provoking as well.
Definitely.
As always, we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep those conversations going.
Absolutely. Stay curious.
Stay curious. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters.
See you next time.